Dig deeper into that and work on some solutions together today. And I'm just going to hand the mic over, if you wouldn't mind giving us an introduction of yourself. That would be fantastic.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm Annie McDaniel. I'm state representative for state of South Carolina, House District 41. I serve 3 counties, and I'm just elated to be here, learning all about the electric vehicles and what I can take home, and also what I can share from a political perspective to help you guys. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Julie Peacock. I'm at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, and of course you heard from me yesterday, so I want to take this time to say, I've worked on electric vehicle infrastructure since ARA and EV projects starting in 2011. And I remember in 2013, the Port of Long Beach, California was going to order 10 BYD buses. And I thought at the time, oh my gosh, that's so incredible. There's going to be 10 electric buses. And at the table I sat at yesterday, I heard the city of Charlotte say they're planning for more than 100 electric buses. And I just thought, these conversations are really complicated and really hard to figure out, but that is literally the space of 10 years. To go from 10 buses in a much bigger market, completely different to where we are today, where we're sitting in this room and having this conversation. So I just want to commend all of you for the work. You're truly deploying EVs right now, and this is sort of the hard part, is to figure it out, but I think the information sharing that's happening in this room is really quite amazing. So I just thank you for having the joint office here to share in the conversation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexa Wojtek. I am a Deputy Director of Programs for the Tennessee State Energy Office, and I also run one of 2 Clean Cities coalitions in Tennessee, the Middle West Tennessee Clean Fuels Coalition. Within the State Energy Office, I lead our energy and transportation work, and I've been working on EVs since I started back in 2014, and so it is really an exciting time to see this stuff actually hitting the pavement, and we're actually putting stuff out there after so much planning. And so very excited to be here with you all today. Love to engage more with the locals and understand local challenges and ways in which we can help from state government. And so I'm excited for that dynamic conversation.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Stephen Costa. I'm also with US DOT, and I'm also with representing the Joint Office here today. I'm happy to share as much information as I can with you, along with you.
All right, thank you all for being here and for having this conversation. So we're going to start with another Mentimeter. So get out your phones. Yeah, it's so exciting. So this first question, so if you were not here yesterday, you just need to scan the QR code at the bottom or go to menti.com and type in 16827932. So we're asking, how prepared is your municipality to pursue and implement federal electric transportation funding? And we do also intend to share out all of the Mentimeter data with you all, so we'll add that to the website. So we can all have this going forward. All right, so right in the middle there, looks like. A little bit higher than the middle. Next question is longer, so, and I know that's very tiny and hard to read. We put the question choices on the tables again, so if you would prefer to read it on your phone or on the paper. So what we're asking here is, what needs do you have from the federal or state government to be better prepared? And it's multiple choice, and you can select as many as you like, and it'll help us kind of see what the biggest concerns are. The biggest need to be better prepared is access to data or maps showing capacity of the grid to understand where the charging infrastructure can go. 27 folks said visibility of upcoming funding programs available from the federal and state DOT all in one place. And then the next highest was information about local government accessible tax credits. So that's where we will kind of drive today's conversation. And then, you know, obviously there are a couple other that are pretty close, so a better understanding of state and or federal funding processes, so time when funds go out, when they need to be spent, and then the need for local governments to engage with state lawmakers to ensure local efforts to secure federal and state funding are supported. So let's bridge that gap. Let's start talking. Stephen has got some slides that I'm going to share with us to kind of go over. So I'm going to be the one helping advance the slides, so just let me know when you're ready.
Go for it. Yeah, so I'm happy, I was invited to share what I could with you all. There's been a lot happening on the federal side over the past year and a half or so. So I think a lot of this information you guys probably already have a lot of awareness around. So I'm going to try to skip fast. I don't want to be the boring government slides guy after the meeting. But here we are. So standing team, just let's just jump in. And if there's anything on here that you want me to spend more time on or not, I will. But yeah, so the Joint Office of Energy Transportation, for those that don't, well, I'm sure you all know of JOIT, but this is an interagency collaboration that was stipulated in bill in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and we're about a year and a half in. So this collaboration between DOT and DOE is emerging and flourishing, and the mission of the Joint Office is to to deploy zero-emission vehicles in an equitable, accessible, safe, reliable manner, and to try and help steer the direction of all this new federal funding that's out there. So it's been, an interesting ride as this has evolved. These two big bureaucracies, getting them to agree on the priorities and how to get funding out and all of that has been quite a bit. So this is the this next slide. This is summarizes the major programs that the Joint Office is providing guidance for and technical assistance around. So the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, as you guys all know, or NEVI, that's the $5 billion to get fast charging infrastructure out along alternative fuel corridors across the country. There's the CFI, the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program. It's also led by FHWA, so that's both EV and all fuels, and it's fast on the EV side. It's fast charging and level 2. And then there's the ongoing FTA low-no program for zero-emission buses. The Joint Office is providing input on that. And then EPA has an additional $5 billion for clean school buses, EV school buses. So the Joint Office is playing in all these spaces and helping with all these various programs. So just on NEVI, I don't want to spend too much time here, just to kind of let you guys know just a real quick snapshot on where the program is, the formula program. So last year, all 50 states, as well as DC and Puerto Rico, had their plans approved, and that unlocked, this big pot of money, so states could start planning their approach for contracting and getting RFPs out. You can access those plans; they're up on the Joint Office website. That's the little screenshot on the upper right-hand corner, and you can kind of get in there. So the funding for the next batch of funding, those plans are being reviewed right now. And I just encourage you all just to get familiar, if you're not already familiar with the plan in your state and kind of how the state DOT and state agencies are approaching their where they're prioritizing these stations. I recommend you do so. So when you're putting in for your applications and other discretionary opportunities, that you're kind of reflecting a coordination with what's being done with the formula funding. Georgia, they have an open opportunity RFP. Tennessee, Kentucky just closed. Virginia is open. So there's a lot of RFPs that are out there now. Several states, really got out of the gate early. Maine, Ohio, Colorado, Pennsylvania. They've actually already awarded contracts. So it's kind of exciting. We're actually going to finally start to see some fast chargers in the ground. The last bullet that I want to highlight here is a new opportunity that was just released on Wednesday by Federal Highway. It's kind of a mouthful. The EV charger reliability, accessibility, accelerator project. So this is the money. There's $470 million total over 5 years. The first round is $100 million. This is an opportunity to help fund broken chargers, along corridors and in communities. So it's open to, I guess, state DOTs and localities can put into this money. And this is basically if there's a charger out there in your community that you're aware of, where it's either completely inoperable, or there's a cord broken, or the spoon's broken, or kind of sometimes works or whatever. This would be an opportunity to put in to get a new charger, or either have it replaced or repaired, both fast charger or level 2. And that would be to bring the charger up to meet the minimum charging standards, which I'm going to hit on next. So there's a link here. I know these slides are going to be shared with everyone, right?
Yes,
so,
they will.
So there'll be a webinar next week. Federal Highway is having one, I think, on Thursday. So if you follow the link and look at the end of that slide, you'll be able to find more information on that.
Can I interrupt for a second? Can we see a show of hands of what local governments can access the corridor funding with the NEVI program? Yeah, so it's just a few of you guys that are eligible for that. So
okay, yeah. So like I said, just it's more important to to just kind of make sure that you're aware of the plans, and there's also an opportunity to have input with the plans as well, right? So the states need to do community engagement and to do community coordination. So there's an opportunity for localities to have an influence on how the states are prioritizing that funding. The minimum charging standards, if you're not already familiar with them, I suggest that I would recommend that you get whatever questions you have on it.
yeah, I am.
Oh, okay, sorry. So, anyways, I would make sure that you're aware of the standards. You're going to want to get your questions ahead of putting in for any federal opportunities because funding needs to meet the charging standard. Here's an example of fast chargers that are meeting that are meeting the new standard. This is 4 ports, combined charging system ports, equipped chargers, each capable of delivering 150 kilowatts per vehicle. If you look at the red arrow here, I just wanted to point out the NACS. This was mentioned yesterday, so this is the Tesla standard or their self-coined North American charging standard. So back last November, Tesla and Elon, opened up the standard, and in May this past year, Ford, GM, Rivian, and a bunch of charging manufacturers, announced plans to adopt it starting as soon as 2025. So, of course, Federal Highway just put out its minimum charging standard that I just had up on the screen a couple months before all this. Didn't require NACS. And it still doesn't. So CCS is the standard. But I would just recommend, as you're pursuing funding, as you're working with private infrastructure providers to, come up with a strategy on how NACS might be incorporated. I understand it's not too difficult to incorporate it after the fact, but thinking about, how to have that NACS connector capability up front makes a lot of sense. And then these are slides that I'm just going to pretty much, they're in the packet, you can reference them. The Joint Office has a whole range, of technical assistance strategies, one-on-one meetings with states, communities, tribes, transit agencies, school districts to help kind of, wade through all of these federal programs and to understand what's available. There's a concierge service, there's a number at the bottom. Contact, well ahead of any funding opportunities that you might be going after with technical questions, questions on opportunities. There's a lot here. The next slide just gives an example of some technical assistance resources that just came out. These are kind of like guide sheets, very high level, but they could be shared with stakeholders. They could be shared among your team. One focuses on community engagement. One focuses on the charging station site selection checklist. That's pretty handy. Community readiness, community readiness sheet. So these are things that the Joint Office is developing on an interagency basis. And then the next slide gives just a kind of dichotomy. So as you're starting to interact more with the federal folks, the Joint Office, and the Federal Highway opportunities, just to understand how the work is divided up on the federal team. So anything that's more technical deployment analysis related is more Joint Office. a lot of smart folks in the labs, national labs, and across government there. The joint office brought in a lot of industry folks to come in to help as well, to help with standardization and other issues. So that's more joint office. And then on the financial assistance side, procurement, regulatory guidance, how to meet all of that. That's more on the federal highway side. So just have that slide to kind of show, what the division of labor is on the team. And then the next 3 slides have to deal with CFI. So this was a new opportunity this year. It was the first of its kind program at Federal Highway, so it was definitely a fad. I know it came on fast. The opportunity's closed now. It will be certainly released again over the next 3 years. You can see the funding amounts will be coming out. So I won't dwell too much on these slides, but we can go through the discussion. If you have questions on CFI, you can let me know. There's the 2 opportunity areas for community grants for both EV and other alternative fuels. But that will be continuing, and then the next couple of slides just show what the, kind of all the requirements for the corridor.
I'm going to interrupt again, just so we can see, and if you could raise your hand if your community applied for a CFI grant this round. And then anybody thinking about applying for next year? Okay, good.
All right, good. So, yeah.
One more question, February.
Yeah.
How many folks considered applying for CFI this first round, but didn't because they just couldn't find a path forward?
Everyone?
Okay. All right.
Timing was really tough, and like I said, this was the first of its kind for Federal Highway. The team that was, there in charge of it was kind of their first go with discretionary funding, and the authorizing legislation of this program was really tricky, and trying to adopt it into a funding opportunity that both met the spirit of the legislation and was, accessible was tough. So I know that I believe it's going to be revised. I would be very surprised if there's not a revision to the opportunity coming up, but it will be coming. So everything I mentioned before, the charging standards, understanding how, say, a fast charging application might tie in with the NEVI plan of the state and all that. I think a lot of groundwork will be going on now. Don't wait, get questions into the joint office. They'll be funneled to Federal Highway or handled at the joint office or other places, so you can get those kind of questions answered. The corridor program had no max on award. The community program had a floor of $500,000. So I think that those parameters may stay the same, but again, I think the opportunity, it should hopefully be a little bit more streamlined, but happy to hear your questions and take back. I think that the plane was being built while it was being flown a little bit on the opportunity, so appreciate everyone bearing with everything. So I guess I'm just going to jump ahead, Dory, to the eligible entity slide.
We have a question.
Oh, good.
I have a question. I was wondering, who writes authorizing legislation? Is it just a team of legal people, or are there certain subject matter experts in there to help guide it?
They usually don't call them subject matter experts until it's already done.
Yeah.
And, it is Congress, so you have a lot of lawyers. It's usually written by lawyers for lawyers, and I think that's kind of the problem with it. I think DOE has done these funding opportunities for years, focused on fuels, and they've really dialed in. If you look at their forwards on this topic, it's kind of like 2 pages. It's very clear. The boilerplate stuff is pretty, predictable, and I think that this time around it was very new. Again, for Federal Highway, so yeah, I think all the boiling questions, and they couldn't. The response was huge. There was an inbox. They got over 1,500 emails in with all kinds of questions. There weren't a lot of answers. So, or they were being developed as the questions were coming in, sort of thing. So I think the first year, there's been a lot of baselining, and so yeah, I would suggest make another go of it if you haven't already, and hopefully there'll be more information resources ahead of the next opportunity, which will be forthcoming.
We have another question.
Yeah, just real quick. What is your FY?
24 will be the next.
What from different people have different fiscal years?
Yeah. So October 1st. Yep.
Okay. Because we have ours is July
June,
1st.
July, yeah.
The question was, what is the fiscal year? When does it start? In case you couldn't hear the question.
Yeah.
Is that all federal?
Yeah, that's why we're looking at a potential government shutdown in 2 weeks. So, yeah, gotta love the federal, fiscal year schedule.
Another question.
Sure.
Is the funding distributed to local governments under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law in a way that's similar to funding distributed under the Inflation Reduction Act through direct pay or elective pay reimbursement?
They are direct grants, so I mean I can say that much. There's not like a middle, you're not applying and going through like a state energy office or something like that. So it is a direct reimbursable grant to the community. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, is there a rough timeline for the release of the FY?
Yeah, I tried to get that out of them before I came. Of course, I wasn't able to. So last year, I think it was, it was late spring, and then there was an extension on it. So I'm guessing first quarter, in the late winter, early spring. But yeah, get your questions in. As either if you went through the process last time or you're gearing up this time, certainly get your questions in advance.
Should we expect the next CFI application to be pretty similar to the first one, or do you anticipate a lot of changes?
I'm hoping that there'll be some streamlining. That's what I'm hoping. And so, this was, the federal highway really drove the bus on this. The joint office had some influence on the way it was put together, but not as much. So hopefully that will, things will take shape a little bit better. And there'll be more knowns this time around. There's just so many unknowns with this kind of first of its kind program for DOT.
Well, the CFI topic is looking at how do you determine, first, we love that the grants are coming. These are huge. There's a huge difference between capacity of large cities and rural cities and responding. You're talking about a team versus an individual in a lot of these cases. So when the NOFOs, the time between the NOFO and the grant deadline, who determines that? Because that's what kills us a lot of times. Some of us have 2 to 3 month lead times just to get things approved,
right,
much less planned, that involve a complicated, because if you're 1 or 2 people, you're putting together a whole team, and then you've got to do engagement and everything else. So how does that determine?
Yeah, and I heard that yesterday, and I'm certainly going to be taking that back. Julie and I will be taking it back. I know the questions were coming into the CFI inbox last time with folks saying, well, we have to get a resolution passed. Do you need a resolution? What do you need from us to show that there's approval within the municipality or the community to put in, and those things aren't required. On the federal side, but we heard that that's what you all were doing, and we heard it yesterday as well. So yeah, it's a huge ramp-up time. Again, now that we know that there'll be 3 more years of this, so hopefully there'll be more time to get prepared. But yeah, the timeline was clearly too short. Folks weren't getting their questions answered fast enough. They did add an extra. I think that there was hope that there would be a month extension. They got 2 weeks. As far as who decides. Like I said, I don't know, I'm going to throw lawyers under the bus, but that tends to be who gets in the way.
Well, since we're throwing lawyers under the bus,
yes.
Is there a process by which the joint office in its role is reaching out to representative local governments and representative communities to ask the question, how much time do you need to put together one of these grants? Yeah, exactly.
Not that question specifically, but we just reviewed hundreds of applications that came in under CFI. And so for the next few months, we're going to be working together to figure out what worked well and what didn't work well. And part of that is Stephen and I being here and hearing directly from you what didn't work well, where are the areas that you need support, not just your questions, but sections of the applications that just didn't make sense necessarily for you, or there are places that things need to be reframed. Do you need technical support on writing a workforce development plan? Are there elements like that would be specifically helpful that the joint office can support your applications going forward by producing some sort of roadmap or how-to guide? That's what we're going to be doing over the next few months in conversation with Federal Highway. So really great timing for us that this conference is happening and that we can sit in the room and hear directly from you. But as Stephen said, we're really hopeful that the next round there will be some tweaks. It'll be a little bit easier. The time frame might be a little bit harder for us to move just because of Federal Highway, but we'll definitely be in the room and taking your comments to the people who write the grant application.
I just want to add, sitting in the state legislature, this is very different because a lot of the money that comes down from the feds, it does come through the state. And depending on where your state level leadership is, it can determine how the money gets to you, particularly in rural communities. So I want to encourage you, if you have council of governments, to try to work with them if you're rural and you don't have the capacity to write grants, so that they can kind of assist you. Last year when they had the Congressional Black Caucus meeting in DC, one of the things that we shared with them was that when you send the money and when the money comes down, you need to kind of look at whether it should stop at the state and let the state put regulations in place, or whether it should go directly to the locals. So I'm elated to see that this money is coming to the locals, but just want to encourage you to try to work with your council of governments to assist in letting you know when those application processes open and assist you in getting the grants written. Thank you.
Yeah, and I could just add from the state perspective, so in Tennessee, the way that it shook out this time around, at least with CFI, we convened a lot of our local government partners on calls to support those that did want to submit their own applications, but then we at the state level decided to pull together a rural-focused application that would support rural communities. So to the extent that it would be funded, we would then push out subawards to rural communities. And so that's how we tried to handle that piece of it. So, you know, that could be a question that you engage early with your state energy office or your state DOT on the front end before this next round comes out.
Just as the reality of what is happening right now, I do engage with my state energy office. I'm from Arkansas. My state energy office didn't even know that they were going to submit for Solar for All, and like someone decided that in a closed room the day before. So it's like wondering about like state level capacity here in the Southeast. You know, a lot of us represent big and small governments, but what considerations are there for those that have the capacity to apply and are set up to get this first round, right? And are we going to see the same people, the same communities, the same states get all of those opportunities? And then, I mean, does that just like tax out their programs? And then what money is going to be left for those that didn't have those plans in place and didn't already have that community engagement and still don't have capacity to write grants? I mean, how evenly distributed is this money going to be, considering like we're not prepared at all to handle it at the state or local level sometimes?
Are you in good conversation with your congressional leadership, congressional officers? And the reason I ask is, thank you. And the reason I ask is, I know in South Carolina I have a fairly decent relationship, and they have staff. And they can put you or whoever you're working through on an email list. And when this information comes out, those staffers are supposed to be knowledgeable. And they should be shooting out emails to you and information to you, letting you know what's coming down the pipeline. So if you don't have a relationship with them, I would encourage you to, so that they can ensure that you get this information hot off the press.
So I just want to say to the joint office that your webinars are great for CFI, NEVI, all these interrelated grants, so good job.
They will be very happy to hear that. They worked pretty hard on those, so thank you.
So I'm from Greensboro, and I'm from GDOT, so Greensboro Department of Transportation, and we have probably about, I don't know, 10, 12 staff, so we have a bigger staff, and it was hard for us to apply. So I can't imagine for a smaller municipality how hard it could potentially be. Do you know when the awards will be announced? I know you're going through it. Yesterday we talked a little how it's a lot to read, a lot to write, but also a lot to read. Do you have any ideas when those awards will be announced? And for people who did apply in the first round, if they don't get accepted, will there be such a significant difference with the second round application that we have to completely restart from scratch, or can we rectify some of that old content?
guess. I know there's a lot of pressure now. You know, the White House, getting into political season, so they want to see stuff getting out there. So I know there's pressure to get things reviewed and have announcements. I think in the fall, at some point before we get too late into before we touch the holidays. I'm pretty sure. So I think the intent is October, November. But don't hold me to it. And then as far as a lot of the authorizing language, it did come from Bill. It's in there, so I wouldn't expect wild changes. Hopefully, with the revised code will have just more clarity. There was an intent to have this program be more accessible to new entrants, to folks that haven't necessarily put in for federal funding, particularly for EV charging before. So there was an effort, to try and make it more simplified, some of the criteria and whatnot. But I think, there was so much other legalese in there that I think the mission might not have been successful. So I do think that those announcements will be soon. And I think that, if you're not successful, if an applicant isn't successful, certainly being able to build on that application, revise it. There may be debriefs. For unsuccessful applicants might be able to put in for a debrief and have that feedback. So
that'd be helpful. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So this is kind of a South Carolina specific question while we've got a state rep here, but I'm curious if other states are feeling the same. One major limitation we have with grant writing is whenever there's a requirement that, say, the State Department of Transportation puts in a letter of support, and SCDOT does not do that. They will do a letter of acknowledgement that our application exists. So I'm curious if anybody else has come upon that limitation.
So you're saying a state DOT that just by its own policy and procedure cannot meet the requirement of what the grant is asking for?
Yeah. So to answer your question, please contact the State Energy Office, South Carolina. We do letters of support, if that'll be helpful.
Oh yeah, you guys are great.
Yeah. And also, there's the TICTAC, the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers that are there to help. They just got up and running. I know the South Carolina one, September 1 is officially open, and I think by November they should have staff to help write grants. And they're here for local governments in particular, so and communities. So if you don't know the contact in your state, I think North Carolina Central is the head in the Region 4 for the TICTAC. So if you are looking for grant writing assistance or need some capacity, I think that's what they're there for. So I don't know if y'all are going to talk about that, but the TICTAC, if you've heard of that, Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center. If you don't know, contact me and I'll try to figure out how you can get in contact with the one in Region 4 in your state. But for South Carolina, it's the University of South Carolina, and we have the contacts for that.
As far as the state DOTs go, if there is a fast charging component to the project, it is nice to have a state DOT, and I recognize, I can't say, better to have a letter of support, but, there is a recognition that, hey, this entity's putting in for us fast charging along, corridors, and the state DOT has jurisdiction over the NEVI side. To show that coordination is always that's a good thing, but yeah, something a little bit more specific than the letter would be better.
And I just want to quickly address too, I'm only one representative in South Carolina, and I try to be very accessible to my constituents, but if there's anything that you can't get from any of the state agencies, Andy McDaniel, you can call my office. I make sure that I talk to those state agencies and find out why they're not being responsive, particularly with funding coming into the state.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good, just to hit on the point you're making about DOT in South Carolina, what our friend from Arkansas was speaking about the lack of capacity at the state level there, just recognizing that there is a huge amount of discrepancy about how all of these state agencies engage across the states. We have some states in the Southeast which the DOTs are telling you all they're doing community engagement, but they're not. We've got energy offices that are exceptional. We've got others that are not. We've got some that are engaging. We've got some that are politicized. We've got an entire mishmash.
Yes.
And so when we look at the Southeastern region, one of the challenges that we all face is that there is no same when we go state to state, but yet the federal guidelines are the same for every state. And so I think that tension is just very real. So I just wanted to kind of hit on that so that we're just amplifying that challenge that I think everybody in the room in one level or another is either facing, or they're in a state where they've got an awesome energy office like Tennessee that's putting together a rural application, which is awesome, right? But I don't know of any other state that did that, in this CFI round. So just something to keep in mind.
So is the match requirement going to be the same for the second round?
Yeah, the 80-20.
Yeah. Just, what Brittany had said about like how the money is going to be distributed, it seems like it could be potentially difficult for some of the smaller communities with the minimum award size being so high, and then the 20% match. Because like we're doing a regional, our plan is to do a regional application, but it would be harder for the smaller communities to join considering that match.
The floor. Yeah, sure.
So I don't know if your state has used their VW, the 15% allowable for VW for EV charging infrastructure, but for Tennessee at least, in our application, we leveraged that as a cost share contribution to help communities that might not be able to meet that local match requirement. So we were able to leverage it because it's not federal funding. So that could be something to ask your state about if they haven't utilized that.
Yeah, we can't, unfortunately. But
I want to address that as well. Only from the standpoint of, I just need everybody to know that who you elect does matter, and how hard they work for you does matter. So we have a real infrastructure authority in South Carolina, and we had the same issue with money coming in where the rural communities were asked to put up a match. And it took going to every meeting that I know that was occurring to say, how can you expect rural communities who do not have money to match money against these large cities that have plenty of money? And one response I got back was, well, you have to have skin in the game. Well, yeah, but you have to give them skin to have in the game. So we went all those rounds, and we finally got to the point where I guess they got tired of me showing up, that they decided to put in a component where if you made application, they would waive that match. And the reason I'm saying this is to encourage you all to aggravate the devil out of your elected officials. They're the ones who make the decisions about how this money comes. They control what happens at the state level, the national level with these agencies that does the disbursements and write the applications. So stay in their ears and let them hear you so that they know that what they're doing is not getting the impact that they're out here saying that it's getting when they're running for election. So just make sure you stay in your elected officials' ears.
I would just echo that. I'm with City of St. Pete and our representative Castor. I mean, get to know your legislative aides, for your representatives too. It was, how can we help? Are you doing this? Are you really doing this?
Yes.
How can we make it easier? And having access to legislative aides as a new sustainability director was incredibly helpful to get letters of support and stuff like that. So thank you for your advocacy where it matters.
Could I encourage possibly reaching out to local governments to ask what would be a good substitute for the 20%? Maybe there are other types of match that could be brought forward that they could do.
Yeah, and I mean, it didn't have to be cash. I believe that, cost share could be in kind. So there were, a range of different things. But yeah, as far as having a productive, helpful, technical assistance focused on.
Are we doing a sliding scale?
Yeah.
Based on population?
I know that the number of award, the floor, the $500 million for the community. I think that there was a concern of too many. Would DOT be able to crank out micro grants in large number in a timely fashion? So that's why there's the floor. But partnerships and making aggregating projects to be larger in size can help with that.
The ever looming prospect of the elective pay tax credit, and I wonder if the agencies writ large, all of the agencies who are granting for EPA and DOT and DOE, have looked at maybe the timing of the requirement of delivery of that cost share match, so that once the project can be completed, then they have recouped the elective payment.
Right.
Maybe then they can present the cost match.
Yeah, because I don't believe that an entity would have to have the full 20% upfront on day one. It would be on a reversible basis.
It'd be really great to have that explicit.
Yeah, to have it more explicit. Yeah, that question would come in for sure. All All right, other questions?
I just want to make a quick statement on the 80-20 split. So in Greensboro, our office is also our metropolitan planning organization. So we actually applied on behalf of the smaller communities around us as well. So that 20% local match, although we're not exactly sure where it will come from, it will probably come from MPO appropriated funds or even from the city of Greensboro mostly, with a little bit here and there from the other municipalities. But that could, depending on where you're at, you know, and what kind of structures you have around you, there could be that kind of, you could have some larger agency, you know, apply on behalf of your community, depending what size community you are and what kind of, you know, agencies you have nearby. So that's what we did in Greensboro. So we also are representing, you know, maybe 6 or 7 other little small towns around Greensboro, plus our rural Guilford County in North Carolina as well. So that is an option for that 80-20 split. If you do have an MPO, the MPO can use some of their funds for that. So.
Yeah, with that 20% match, we did some engagement before more clarification came out with like electric vehicle charging companies, and we wanted letters of commitment. We only got 1 letter of commitment, but letters of interest and letters of support saying that they are interested in putting up that 20% match. By being that third party to do the install, they would own, operate, maintain on city-owned properties. And so we were able to get around that 20% match, you know, because you can also include, there's a lot of things that you can include in that 20%. Yeah, Georgia Power is a make-ready program, but there's no guarantees. And so that conversation with the third parties and saying in their letters of support and then me referencing it in the application allowed us to be able to meet that 20%, saying that we of course have to go through a fair and equitable RFP process or whatever procurement process that you'll have to go through. But.
So he kind of answered my question a little bit, but I was wondering if there's any current or future funding that supports a third-party model where they own, install, maintain whatever it is. Because in our community, our administration is really not, and our transportation department doesn't want to own, operate, maintain them. So I want to talk to you a little bit more, or anybody else that's worked with a third-party vendor, if I can get your card to chat with you a little bit more about that. Because that's the route that the train has left the station. I think that's what
the CFI doesn't require that the applicant own and operate. But yeah, those arrangements have to be set up.
I'm Robin with City of Maitland. I had a question for those who kind of already applied for the CFI. It ties into a larger question. Did any of you all already have some sort of formal study done for your infrastructure to help with your planning that you're able to use in your application and reference?
Yeah, we conducted a survey, like as soon as the CFI NOFO came out, we immediately put an online survey up and started doing canvassing of our communities. And it was a real kind of equity-based survey about accessibility and things. So we got that perspective, and that helped with the Justice 40 requirements and helped with some of the disadvantaged community outreach engagement. And then we also were actively surveying our EV charging stations, but we still don't know where they all are. It's a bit of a mess. But we have a sense of the key charging stations in our community. So I think that helped. But we had to get going right away, and that's just because we have a bigger staff that we were able to do that. But if we didn't have that, it would be really hard. And even then, I had to go out myself and try to find stuff while trying to prepare for other meetings. So it's a little complicated, but yeah, I don't know if any of you all had similar.
So we did a site suitability assessment in-house, and we also did a public survey to let people kind of weigh in where they would want as well. It doesn't necessarily dictate exactly where we can place it, because it may be, we get a lot of people that are like, I just want an EV charger at my local brewery, and I can't do public improvements on private properties, but we'll take it and try to figure out if there's something nearby we can serve.
And what we did is we pretty much said that, hey, we have a limited timeline. These are the places, this is the regions of Atlanta that need this infrastructure. We've got 25 different locations that can go there. And then once we know what the funding is, then we can go to our community, do our full community engagement. There's community engagement funds that are attached to CFI, so we put in a budget for that. That process as well for in-person surveys, etc. It's kind of like the RFP for the third-party vendors. It's like this is the process that we would go through if awarded.
The City of Greensboro's survey is excellent.
Yeah, I know we talked about it.
I can speak to a more Florida application example. City of Maitland, that's what I grew up just down the street from me, but I'm in St. Pete. So we had an existing inventory of all of our chargers in St. Pete, but it required my sustainability coordinator, literally boots on the ground with our Complete Streets folks. They had already inventoried, working with Duke Park and Plug, or whatever that program is called, sorry. But we actually rolled in a study into our application. So we were specifically looking at solar electric vehicle chargers because we're a peninsula on a peninsula and we have the resiliency need in a post-storm event to have, moving batteries. And so part of our application was really to deploy a pilot and a study to better understand where they were being utilized, how much energy they were being generated, how much energy they were generating, and moving them about different places in our underserved Justice 40 communities to see if they were actually being utilized. And so I would encourage, I think that was within the scope of the application, you could roll in a study as part of it, but that was part of what we were hoping to have funded, was actually looking at it, so.
Yeah, so I worked for a small local government previously, and now I work for City of Maitland, which is another very small city. And that was part of a deterrent for us to apply for this grant, was we felt like we didn't have any sort of pre-existing study. We weren't sure how competitive we would be if we were just kind of randomly trying to quickly put together, okay, let's just put chargers here, 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 because we think it would be good. So we had the similar thought of let's just wait till next year and hopefully we'll get together a study. And now I'm at a different city where similarly they haven't done any sort of study or anything of that.
I mean, there was a small provision for planning and pre-construction activities. So not just a planning only grant, there had to be deployment, but that's a reasonable approach. But obviously working with utility early on, we're looking to see where the infrastructure is, the alternative fuel locator, seeing where the gaps are, all that legwork, as much as you can be doing now. Is going to help. I just want to ask real quick before I forget. So as far as the open period, so everyone was throwing tomatoes about how short the timeline, and it was way too short. What would be a reasonable? I don't know what to do. Thoughts from the other side of the table. What should we be bringing back to say, hey, this is what is reasonable for all involved as far as the time to turn around an application.
Do you know what it actually was in terms of length?
Let's see. Was it 40? Was it 60 days?
I thought it was 60 days because you guys were really gracious and postponed it so we didn't have to submit right before Memorial Day. You gifted everyone Memorial Day.
So I think it wound up being 60 days.
60.
After it was 45. And
it was
then
45
got
and
back to 60.
So is it 75? What should we be bringing back?
One of the problems with extensions is by the time the extension comes, a lot of us have already given up because we just know we can't. So it doesn't help.
Yeah. So what's a reasonable period? Not assuming no extension. You can plan around. 90 is that's the ideal. 120.
I would also point out that some jurisdictions require going in front of commission or city council.
Yeah, which was discussed yesterday.
In Shelby County, Tennessee, it takes a solid 6 weeks for us to get something in front of commission with our procedures. So I think other people have similar structures where you have a month lead time even to get something in front of local government officials to really.
You're supposed to give them the full package already completed.
Right. Yeah. So it does make it hard if that is ever a requirement in the grant to have that government body approval.
So just to make sure you guys heard that, so they need to have a full package in front of the local government to get the local government approval. So I'm hearing there's like two tensions there. You need 6 weeks to get on their docket, but you also need to have a full proposal, which you can't do in 6 weeks.
Right. So that was just 2 weeks to write it.
Right. Okay.
So I know one thing that DOE does is they do the concept paper phase before the full application, and I don't know if that's something that FHWA would ever be able to do, but I feel like it does help because the concept paper is a much lighter lift.
Yeah.
But you can almost get those like pre-approvals in a way, and then if the concept paper gets a thumbs up, then you work on the full application. So I don't know if that's possible, but that could be another approach.
Does the language of the IRA and the bill require that these programs all be implemented as competitive grants, or could they be rolled out as formula grants instead that would make it a lot easier on local governments?
I mean, there's a lot of bill NEVI, so that's formula, that bucket, and then that's the biggest bucket, and then there's 2.5 billion competitive. So it's a mix, and there's other formulas. I mean, you're managing all kinds of formulas. But then you got to work with the states, right?
Quick question. I didn't complete the application, so I don't know. But did any particular rural persons, did you have any things within the application that prohibited you from being able to even submit the application, or was it, like she stated, mostly just getting in front of the council, whatever government have to approve it, and having it actually written? Were there any other prohibitions or things that kept you from getting your application or even filling out the application?
The cost share. Cost share.
Cost share, okay.
Lack of staff capacity. Staff capacity is huge, because if you're one person, you're not only trying to do what you already have committed, but now you're on a single big grant. You're spending an inordinate amount of time trying to get it done. And I was going to echo, in our community, it's at least 6 weeks before, and that's assuming you don't have a work session that you have to do ahead of time to explain something, because then you're a 2-month window just to go through the approval process, because we're required to have public input as part of our submission.
We helped a rural application for CFI that was a corridor charging application through rural counties in western North Carolina, and the hang up that we got around by engaging with the North Carolina DOT was around the rebate structure. So we were working with the COGS, we had local government, MPO, RPO, everybody on board, but nobody could assume the responsibility of being that fiduciary agent that was going to front all the money and get rebated, right? NCDOT stepped in and took on that role, so we were able to get the application in, but if they hadn't done that, the project would have been dead, even though there was, support across 10 counties, all the COGS involved and everybody. There still was just nowhere to land that rebate structure. Nobody wanted to take that responsibility.
I echo that too, because that's so big with us is in small communities, because you essentially, even though you're getting refunded, you have to have that money up front and you have to have it in your budget. So if your application process is not coincide with the budget, and we make our capital budgets 5 years in advance, so like to add a giant project that's not in your budget, and then now we have to come up with $1 million up front. I mean, that's...
Yeah, and I mean, the private entity component, that was just to be, bringing in the match too, bringing your private infrastructure, whatever role they're playing in getting the infrastructure installed, they could bring, the private partner was also able to bring the match.
I think what she's saying though, the issue is you're putting 100% up front, right? And then you're getting reimbursed 80%. And if you created your capital budget, you're then putting a huge project.
Even get the project.
Yeah, so you're having to take it from somebody else to pay it up front, and then maybe another project has to get put on hold to do yours because you have the funding, so you get that reimbursement. So it kind of, it's like stealing from one person to pay for a project that you'll eventually get money back from.
I
just want to ask everybody, can we just have a reminder to tell these folks where you are from? Because I think what's unique about your question is you're asking for rural examples, but we actually just heard from Fulton County, who's one of the largest counties in the whole room here. We heard from a small suburban community, and we heard from some rural people. So this is a diversity of communities that are kind of saying the same thing. So just want to point that out there, and just ask y'all to tell them where you're from. Cool.
That's what I was going to ask. Are you from a rural community?
I'm from Charleston, and I was going to go into like when you put up all that upfront money and then you don't get reimbursed for a while. Like compliance for these grants is one of like our budget's biggest concerns of applying for these grants is, are we actually gonna do the compliance right to get it all back? Like if we mess up one thing, now we're out $1 million. Like that's a really big hit to the budget. And like was brought up, they're different budget years and that's really challenging. So I don't know if there's any, I know a lot of this is in the legislation, but if there's any thought to simplifying the compliance, but that honestly is our biggest limitation to applying for grants. It's not writing them, it's the compliance.
So we already went through it, but as far as eligible entities, it's essentially this opportunity is focused towards public entities, no privates. So this was set up so that you don't just have these private companies come in and swoop in and like take all the money and run. So, anyways, that's what that is. Last point on CFI. The other thing that Dory and the team had asked me to just touch on are these toolkits that were developed by DOT. There was really kind of there was always, what these do is they kind of synthesize a lot of information that's already out there. Back when Bill was authorized, and actually even around the time of the administration change, there was all this money coming in, and especially in DOT, everyone's kind of looking around saying, what do we have for technical resources to go out to help folks, local communities, figure out how to plan and fund the infrastructure, and there was a lot of old resources from like the Obama administration and whatnot. So there was an effort at DOT, this was an interagency effort to develop these toolkits, DOT-led, but working with DOE, working with EPA, USDA, HUD, all those other federal agencies. There was a lot of community involvement. Actually, we work with Clean Cities quite a bit in getting community input through these workshops across the country on what folks need to know. And so there's a rural EV toolkit, there's an urban EV toolkit, and so the topics that are listed here are kind of what's covered, everything. This is something that could be in somebody, a practitioner that's well underway, or folks, that are very new. So there's like, EV basics, what are the charging types, what are the speeds, what are the technical ins and outs, what are the challenges, what are the benefits in the rural landscape and the urban landscape for electrification, micro-mobility opportunities, infrastructure planning, a lot of infrastructure planning, and a lot similar to the resources that the Joint Office is now starting to put out. Discussion on building codes, and fleets and curbside charging, that's more on the urban side. Accessible design considerations and how to incorporate those into projects. Huge emphasis on partnership opportunities, and of course funding and financing opportunities through the federal government. So a lot of success stories, and we're proud of these pieces of resources. There's links here that you can access them if you haven't already. The next slide, Dory just touches on partnership opportunities again. What we talked about yesterday is that it's so important to develop partnerships early on to make sure that you can get projects off the ground. We spent a lot of time talking about partnerships with multi-state initiatives such as this forum, SACE, corridor planning partners, local and regional partners. There's a lot of time spent talking about Clean Cities coalitions. Actually, Clean Cities is now Clean Cities and Communities. So if you don't work with a coalition in your state, work with them. They're great. We work with them in getting the people together, and they're the experts on the ground, experts that know what all fuels, landscape, opportunities and barriers in a particular area. Electric utilities is a whole discussion about how to engage them, the importance of engaging with them early in the process, and then of course the charging networks. A lot of discussion about the different business models that you can set up with network providers, their turnkey services, working with them. So again, this is a really high-level resource in some way, but it dives in deep into some of the other aspects. The next slide just kind of goes through some of the project planning tools inside the or resources in the toolkit. There's these checklists, that kind of go through how to plan for infrastructure. There's, of course, a million tools and resources across government. This kind of synthesizes and consolidates them into one spot. And then the next slide is the funding matrix. So this is a snapshot of funding and financing opportunities across federal government, opportunities DOT, DOE, USDA and Small Business Administration, Department of Labor, Commerce, IRS. So this is all there's a matrix in each of the toolkits, and so you want to check those out. All sorts of opportunities where there's EV, there may be, there is or there may be EV, applicability, EV project eligibility. So there's also kind of a section in there about, going for federal funding, the process, the requirements, best practices, tips, and all of that. And then the last slide, I was asked, and I'm not a tax expert, But these are a big deal. So the IRA tax credits that have been talked about over the past couple of days, there's, of course, the personal tax credit opportunity, then there's a commercial clean vehicle tax credit opportunity, and then the all fuel refueling tax credit. And so, the exciting thing is this direct pay opportunity to get funds for tax exempt and governmental entities to be able to claim the tax incentive without going through a middleman or a third party to pass the savings on, which has historically been the way for local governments and communities to get the benefits. So I don't know a whole lot about it. I know at our table yesterday, Minor was talking from North Carolina about how I guess he figured out where the forms are and how I guess it's actually it's pretty straightforward to claim this benefit, the tax credit. So there's more information here. So Jory, you're going to share all the slides because I went fast, but yeah.
I just want to see a show of hands. How many of y'all are familiar with looking into, already applied, or looking to use the tax credits to purchase vehicles? Just a couple. So, I mean, this is a really huge opportunity that did not exist with the previous tax credits, where local governments, and also nonprofits in your communities are able to access these tax credits, even if you're tax exempt. So I think that it would be great to hear from Minor, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about what you've done, like you've gone through or looked at the process, or no, for the tax credits?
Yes, so we got real excited in the winter of 2022 going into 23 when we realized that the one difference between the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act is the Inflation Reduction Act included a clear pathway for local governments who do not pay taxes to have the same realize the same benefit as taxpayers for the things that are on this slide. And it is administered through a process that they refer to as direct pay or elective pay. And finally, after a lot of effort to determine and learn what the process was for a local government to pursue this funding, in June of this year, the Department of Treasury or Administration of Treasury released the guidance that there are two IRS forms. One is in the 300 series numerically and one is in the 900 series that local governments actually fill out and submit. And up until June, we didn't know if there was an application or a project proposal requirement or what we would submit to get the funding. But it is two discrete forms, and they were discussed in detail at the America is All In Roadshow that was sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Institute and maybe the White House or somebody. But I went to that in Charlotte and learned more about it. But I'm relieved that there are forms that are accessible, and so it's a pretty straightforward process. Is that what you wanted me to say?
Yeah. They're not out yet, though. The vehicle is not out yet.
So those two forms are not?
They're not available yet. They just told us they were coming. And again, that funding's in different tax years. So if you buy the vehicle, like say January 2023, you can't get your credit back until you file taxes in 2024. Which means you get it like summer 2024. So that's a whole different budget year also.
Yeah, so I'll add to that point exactly that the projects that are funded through this program or these programs have to be complete and in operation before the filing is submitted. The filing is due May 15th of the year following the completion and implementation of the projects. And there is a potential for a 6-month extension to be requested for that filing. And then there will probably be a period of a few months where the filings are processed and approved, and then the money is distributed. So I do think that we can anticipate a significant delay, but like for a solar project, the panels need to be operating, generating electricity. For EV projects, the chargers need to be in place, vehicles need to be using them to charge to qualify for these programs, and that has to be completed in time for the May 15th filing or the 6-month extension of that filing.
I was on a webinar with our very own Chris Castro this week, and he had a really good idea that I thought I'd share. He basically said, instead of like sitting around waiting for this tax credit and all these credits to come in, when they do come in, just put them in a different fund and use that to reinvest in more climate action activities. So don't depend on it as reducing the purchase price of your vehicle. Just use it as kind of a bonus to create a fund to do more action and leverage that funding. I thought that was a great idea. And then if you don't get it, it's not the end of the world.
So Allison, City of St. Pete, we, for municipalities or entities that have sustainable purchasing policies or fleet policies, we're undertaking a revision and we embedded like does this have a tax credit available? Kind of check the box for our procurement and purchasers. So the folks that may not have that awareness that we as sustainability practitioners have. And we actually included like see these forms so that we can go for it beginning next fiscal year, I guess. It's important.
I think that's a great idea to have so that the folks that are, spending the money understand to be looking for the tax credit, making sure that they're all aware of it. That's a great way to do that.
Heather Bullock, City of Charlotte, North Carolina. I was just curious if other people had any concerns around the fact, like you can't, if you use tax exempt debt to fund the projects, then you can only have a 15% credit. So, we're trying to assess whether, again, like with the grants, the juice is worth the squeeze because it's a new process that like our, finance folks have to figure out. And I mean, I think it'll still be worth it, but like I'm wondering if we still shouldn't go the route of trying to have an external, third party take the tax credit because they can take the full tax credit instead of the 15% reduced amount.
We tried to get the IRS here to answer complex questions like that. I mean, we're unsuccessful, but I think that's a really good question. And I think it also, I'm going to be curious to see what kind of creativity comes out of merging these tax credits with something like CFI, where if you're a local government and you're applying for a CFI grant and you're getting a bunch of charging infrastructure, you now qualify for the alt fuel property tax credit as well. And if you're looking at matches and money going out of pocket to bring that money into your community, there's now going to be another stream of money coming back in. And understanding the budget year and all that complexity, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of creativity emerges to kind of blend these opportunities together and maybe help take some of the pressure off of some of the CFI requirements by tapping into the tax credits.
So a lot of questions came in on tax incentives. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that needs to be clarified in the notebook. The next one.
All right, so, oops, we go back to the Mentimeter just so that we can these questions. So looking at the highest one was access to data and grid maps for understanding like grid capacity. Do we have any specific questions that we'd like to ask?
Dory? Yeah. I have one thing to say about that. It is actually something that the Joint Office is working on right now with the Pacific Northwest National Lab. It's working on creating what they call the Guide for Utility Service. It's a website that can be used as a portal for, it's really designed for utilities to use, but they can upload their distribution system data there. And in order to deal with some of the concerns around data privacy, we're going to use a red, yellow, green approach. Areas that where the feeder is full, you need a transformer, those might be red. Areas that might have some room, some head, I guess, will be yellow, and then green is a more active area for development. So the GUS tools in development now, PNNL is piloting it with the state of Kansas and a few rural electric co-ops there. But I know a lot of states, public utility commissions require some data sharing on distribution system capacity generally. Sometimes it's hard to translate that because it's been really focused on interconnection for solar and the distribution system maps, but it's something that
that the Joint Office has invested some time and money thinking about how to get the information and data there. Now, it will require some proactive data sharing by the utility still, but we are trying to figure out how we can provide that information in a public forum, which addresses the concerns that utilities have about privacy.
That's huge. So, thank you. Any questions specifically about that?
Sure. Gordon Kenner, DeKalb County. Georgia has a Make Ready program in which the Georgia Power Company provides a lot of the infrastructure needed for large projects. They have advised us that there's a minimum of 40-week up to 70 weeks delay in getting a transformer that can serve these chargers we're planning. Is there any relief in sight for that? 70 weeks to wait for a new transformer. It's a long time.
Yeah, we're starting stealing from other governments.
Yeah, usually utilities do have a sharing program. I can't remember what they call it for, equipment they need in crisis. But that's something we've heard nationally. We're definitely thinking about it, working with OEMs to think about what are the things we need to do to produce transformers that comes up consistently across the board, not just with electric vehicles, but even with resiliency measures. If you're a small utility and you're down to one transformer and you have a big storm come through, it's really a big safety concern. And I say it like that just to say that DOE broadly is looking at that issue and what we can do to just support the supply chain, not just as it relates to delays in service connections for electric vehicles.
Mike Rush in DeKalb County. I think a lot of it is due to production, getting these transformers. Like Gordon said, 70 weeks to wait for a transformer. I think, during the COVID and with these storms going on, I think a lot of it is due to production.
Yeah, and I'm not in those conversations. I wish I could give you more detail. I've just heard people having them, and I mean, one of it is opening it up new lines of production, and what do we need to do that nationally.
All right, and then our second highest is visibility of upcoming funding programs. So I think we've talked about it a little. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add to that, or any other questions regarding that?
Could you say that one more time, Dory? Sorry.
Yep, it's visibility of upcoming funding programs available from federal government and from state governments, and having it in one place.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a big area for sure, and I know that state energy offices, we try to do the best we can because, one of our roles is as a matchmaker, trying to bring the right folks together to help projects get off the ground. And so to the extent we have some visibility into what's coming, we try to at least give our stakeholders a little bit of a heads up. We also, one of the things I know that we're doing in Tennessee is we're leveraging our state energy program, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act formula allocation to hopefully leverage consultants that could then help other parties apply for funding. So say a local government doesn't have the capacity to pull together an application, we could potentially cover the cost of a consultant that could help write that application. And so the state energy program, both the regular annual formula funding and then the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act formula allocation is flexible enough that it could allow that sort of thing. So that could be something that your states could help support with as well. We know that certain IIJA and IRA funding opportunities will be coming for at least a 5-year period in most cases. So we know the ones that will be recurring. So we do have that sense of heads up. But as we plan and try and be aware of different ones, there are others that we know are less clear, like the competitive funding opportunity announcements that come out and we have no heads up that they're coming, but then they drop and then we have to stop, drop, and roll. So we try to do the best we can, but obviously we're all drinking from the fire hose.
Can I address that real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah. What I found in South Carolina, sitting in my role, what they'll do is send us a listing of funds that have been distributed to the different entities. And I always look down for the 3 counties that's in my district. And if I don't see them listed, I'll start calling saying, why didn't we apply for this money? And then finding that it is a huge problem with knowing that the application is there. So I think if we probably need to work with more of our organizations, like I stated in COGS earlier, your local official, your representatives, telling them from the state level to push it down to the local level. But just whenever you're in your spaces, make sure that you ask, how are we, like you're doing now, how are we getting the information out? How are we letting them know? Are we sending it to the chambers and the communities? Even if it come across your desk 3 or 4 times, it doesn't matter. It's better than not coming at all. So that is something of a concern that we're working with. And even at my level in South Carolina, I'm trying to push it. And I'm working with the state governments. And I think what I'll do is take that back to them and see if there's some ideas that they can come up with to help work with feds even from their level and getting this information out. So that's a good point. Glad you all brought that up.
Put a plug in for Michael Dexter at SSDN because that's his literal job, is to help find federal funding for SSDN members. So if you're not